G'day guys, SSW has just delivered a large, complicated transport management system for one of Australia's largest transport management companies. The software does lots of cool things, but during this interview, I'm going to be talking about the process. I'm going to sit down with Jared from the SSW side, a lead dev, and Keith, who was the client and the product owner. And we have a really honest talk about what went well and what didn't, and how Scrum and the Agile techniques help them overcome plenty of obstacles. I think you'll really enjoy it. Check it out. Keith, let me start off by asking, what was the scale of this project? How many months were involved?
Sure. So the project scope was to deliver a tracking system for a major transport and logistics company of their line haul movements. But rather than just a tracking system, it was about event management, which is really about, if you know where a truck is, how long is it going to take to get to its final destination, taking a myriad of factors, whether it's distance, how many rest times they've had, those sorts of things. And so it's incorporated integration through to Google Maps using their API, obviously, but we also integrated through to the GPS provider, so we get something like about 200,000 GPS locations of these trucks per day. So with regards to the scope of the project, it was 6 months in the planning, so this is probably the best value of deciding what we really wanted to do. And we operated in 2-week sprints with SSW, and we had 14 sprints there. So it was effectively 28 weeks of development with two programmers on the team, plus myself.
Jared, can you tell me some of the technologies involved in this project?
Yeah, so we built the project using MVC.
Yep.
And we used entity frameworks, Knockout, and then we had to integrate with Google Maps and the GPS provider as well.
Okay, so Keith, can Scrum be used on enterprise projects, really?
And the answer is absolutely yes. You know, I think a lot of the criticism in days past with Waterfall was that it didn't break down projects into deliverables. The goal is really to deliver working code that you can test and get out to the real world soon. So I certainly see that as one of the advantages. The other advantage is really the realization that in large projects you don't know everything of the design up front. Now it is impossible to garner all the requirements out of the users because one, they haven't experienced that there. So I think that realization of that you don't know everything, you break it up into smaller bits, and you actually encourage change, because change means with a goal of quality or reducing waste or just focusing on the really important. So I think you can certainly take Agile into the enterprise, and at the end of the day, my belief is you get a better product for the users.
I think it was important though that you took the time to understand the business problem that you were trying to solve, and you actually spent a lot of time before you approached us thinking about a way to solve the problem, but you didn't actually delve down into the details. So it gave you that structure, it gave you the problem that you were aiming to solve, and the sort of guardrails to the project, and I think that's important.
Oh, absolutely agree. It's critical because I think there's a false perception that Agile is, well, you don't know what you're really going to do, so somehow you'll figure it out as you go along the line. Yeah. Good development is still having a very clear roadmap of where you want to get. Now, these are the things we want to build, and for any project, I think it's far more important than just the methodology. It's that you're building something that really fits the business, because if you build a product that is not solving real problems, it doesn't matter how elegant or on time that project, effectively it will fail in the end. So upfront design is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so Keith, I'm sure everybody likes the ability to be able to change their mind and things like that, but enterprises typically are worried about Agile projects being aren't you giving us a blank check?
No, not at all. In fact, we have very tight controls because it's almost like this is the amount of time and effort that we have, and we scope and you cost out, you know, a small team and what it's going to cost you. This is going to be your cost. You know, where it totally blows out if you suddenly say, well, no, I'm going to, instead of take 28 weeks, I'm going to take a year. Then yes, it would blow out. But again, that comes back to your approach that says, okay, what we're always gearing ourselves in the back of our mind is there's our budget and there's our constraints that we're trying to work with. And we look at functionality that says, how much of this functionality do we really need versus, you know, what's nice to have? Because at the end of the day, the only way you can ultimately reduce costs or control costs is, one, reducing waste. So don't build stuff that you don't need or you're not sure of. So the first one there. Second one is to really have an efficient team. And if you've got an efficient team, and that's not normally something you can drive more, you know, you get good programmers, they'll develop what good programmers can in the time. The other lever that you have is really how much of this stuff are we going to build? And traditionally in Waterfall and enterprises, people have said, oh, this is my one chance to get everything I ever wanted in a system. So you often find there's functionality, well, just in case I might need this, let's throw this functionality. Projects can become big and bloated. And really, and when you go with a constraint that says, no, these are our dollars that we have on this project, you end up saying, I can afford to jettison this bit of the functionality. Yes, it's nice, but it's not essential. So that's how I believe you ultimately control project costs.
Do you think Scrum helped that? Like, for example, I remember one point in the project where we were able to, because obviously every iteration we're evaluating where we are, there was a point where we actually had to start making some tough decisions and say, all right, we're going to have to start stripping out a lot of things. So do you think that helps?
Oh, absolutely. Scrum in the methodology approach, effectively we would recalibrate costs every 2 weeks. So at the end of a sprint we would be looking forward as to here's what our estimated costs are going forward, and we had the true costs, these were the costs going back. So you simply add those up and you say, am I staying on costs and my budget being actual plus projected? So I actually think it promotes, you know, greater control if you take this approach.
Are you actually saying that your budget was changing every 2 weeks?
No, our estimate to the variation of our budget was potentially changing, and it did. Right. And Jared was saying there was a point where we were finding, and in any project you find things you have to now do that you didn't think you had to do, so requirements are constantly changing. You get a point where you say, this is getting beyond where we expect to do, what can we do to bring this project back? And so you start saying, is there a smarter way I can approach this? But in the end, you generally go, what is the functionality I can live with? And those decisions are made by the business. And you go, and because Agile, even though we ran this as an Agile project, we had a steering committee, you know, which was a traditional steering committee you would have in a Waterfall project, that oversaw this project every 2 weeks. So we would present exactly where we were every 2 weeks, warts and all. We're behind, no, we're falling a little bit behind here because of X. And you know, again, that the management had the confidence in us to say, well, you know what you can spend, what are you trying to do to bring this back? And we were showing even early in the project, we're dropping some of this functionality.
Right. And was the steering committee as sold on Scrum as you are? Are they happy?
They were happy absolutely with the result. So they felt the visibility of the project was always there, because every 2 weeks in Scrum we would be reporting, this is what we did the last 2 weeks, this is what we're projecting to do in the next 2 weeks, and here's still our entire costs right throughout the project out there. And what they were happy about, as I was as a product owner, is you started seeing working bits of the system really early. You know, it's not like you wait till go live or testing time. We were seeing live parts of the code early.
Okay, so question for you, Jared. When you typically do a waterfall project, I feel that the honeymoon period is pretty long before the rubber hits the road and there's some tension and problems like that. On the Scrum project, on this particular project, how long until you feel the honeymoon period was over?
Yeah, so normally with the Waterfall project, obviously the honeymoon period at the end, the developers go away for a long period of time and then come back at the end, and that's normally when the honeymoon period ends. So with Scrum, you're obviously trying to deliver these little increments of functionality. So for us, I think we talked about this before, but our honeymoon period went on for a bit longer than we'd have liked it to, because so we're always trying to deliver software to the customer early. But with this project, there were so many moving parts and it was such a large project that I think we bit off too big a chunk at the beginning. So our time before delivering the first sort of installment of the project was quite a long time. So it's probably, about 2 months. Okay.
So after 4 sprints.
After 4 sprints. So after 4 sprints, we got that first end of the honeymoon thing where we're like, whoa, hold on a minute, okay.
Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I would. The challenge for our project was that you could build working pieces of it, but until you integrated all of them there, it was only when you totally hooked them all together, and because we were having live feeds of GPS from real trucks out there, the real updates from people with mobile apps there. So until that full integration happened, there was a point you thought, well, that's when the honeymoon really finished. And it also finished at a point where, as you got further in the project, your estimates of the work you need to do gets better, because you go, suddenly you're discovering things you need to do. You're making decisions about, well, I'm going to leave this functionality behind. And so a good project like this, it's very dynamic about what goes in, what goes out, how do we do things there. But the hard end is when you look at the dollars and you go, now I have a trouble because I'm seeing that we're not going to make that time or the budget. That's when the honeymoon really finishes, and that was done, sort of as Jared says, sort of earlier in the project, not as early in hindsight as what we probably would have liked, but that would have been on the basis, the only way we would have got it earlier is that we should have jettisoned a little bit more of what we could have had on the minimum viable product earlier and gone with it live.
So that's really like our number one tip. If we were to run this project again, we would spend more time trying to discover what that minimum viable product was. What can we build that's going to deliver value to the customer as early as possible? And we would have, like you said, we would have stripped off a few bells and whistles.
So you're essentially saying that the methodology that kind of comes from lean startups, minimum viable product, is just as appropriate on very large enterprise projects.
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learnt from startups, because in a lot of cases they are developing products that they're not sure. They're often new markets. So what they're aiming to do is to, one, develop something that they think's a minimum viable product, get it out into the real world and get real feedback from the user base as to what are the things that are really important there. And to me, the enterprise is no different. It's a matter of getting something out there that's minimum, that's working, that delivers value, and then getting feedback from the real world and real users as to what's really important at that stage. So I think it's really valid, because that analogy, I suppose, of requirements, you can ask, if there was, you said you wanted a car, you can get requirements from users in the beginning. I want 4 wheels and I want it incredibly quiet and powerful, and you go, okay, I've got the exact car for you. It's a Bentley Continental, it's smooth, it's a V12, and they go, and it's leather, and they go, that's exactly what I want. Now it's $512,000. Well, no, it's really what I want, but now I'm prepared to accept a Holden that's going to do the same thing. And again, often it's a matter of getting that car or the system in people's hands so that they really go, oh, but now I need a trailer with it that's really important.
Right. But I think we don't even want to deliver the what we were saying was next time we wouldn't even want to deliver a Holden. We would just want to deliver 4 wheels, a chassis and a steering wheel. Right. You know, people using it are going to might get hurt, you know, but at least they'll be able to test drive.
Jared, there's nothing wrong with Holdens.
We like Holdens, in case I'm sure many of the listeners out there are going to Holden or
Ford. So I have a problem with Fords, but no. Now with the waterfall projects, just the way that they typically go is that you get some time of downtime. I wouldn't say downtime, but you're able to focus on what you're doing, and then you get more of a kind of the death march near the end. Hopefully, that's not too long before you ship. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that constantly delivering every 2 weeks to a product owner and breathing down your neck is a little bit like having the blowtorch on? And if so, how did you keep the energy up?
I wouldn't agree that having the blowtorch. I suppose, yeah, it's a difficult question. So the good thing for me with Scrum is the fact that you package everything down into these 2-week sprints or 1-week sprint, and you have the goal. So it allows you to get some sort of, it gives you that push that you need to get things done, but then at the same time, it's not that crushing pressure that you don't perform well. You've got that pressure that I need to get this done. You might cut corners and stuff. It gives you a nice block of work that you say, right, in these 2 weeks, we're going to achieve these goals. So for me, there was no there was a slight fire burning under us, but it wasn't a blowtorch. Okay. And that sort of, having a goal every 2 weeks, I think energizes the team in the fact that, we've got this goal that we're going to work towards. Let's do it, and then you can achieve it, and then next 2 weeks another goal, and you keep moving that way instead of this long goal in the distance that you may or may not achieve and that you never get to.
Absolutely, and I think there are some positive aspects of that as well, because whilst you set a goal, when you actually achieve that and you build it, there's a sense of satisfaction of knowing I've done this. You get the tick that I can park that bit, and now I'm actually on to the next bit. So from a product owner, it's very reassuring to see real code working that you can test there. I certainly know from a steering committee that when you can sort of report where we are, it is far more comforting than what you can read the horror stories of sometimes large enterprise projects on Waterfall, where 1 week before they're about to go live, they deliver the bad news, which is, sorry, we have another 6 months of development happening because these things, when we tested it, didn't work. And this was, again, getting back to our original thought is, develop small as you can, get it out in the real world as soon as you can, because even in our project, when we delivered it out into the real world, we found there were so many other problems we had to solve that we hadn't thought about, couldn't think about until you actually delivered it in the real world. And so I think that whole approach of compartmentalizing it, figuring out at what point you can deliver in the real world, and then after you've delivered it, focusing on what is the things that's most important right now that I've got to do in the next 2 weeks is a great way to develop.
I wouldn't mind, Keith, knowing how you reported, how you did reporting to that steering committee, because did you use Microsoft Project, or did you print off a backlog? Or, a lot of people say there's not much reporting in Agile.
So the main, when you talk with steering committees, and particularly at the senior level, the most important one is, Keith, how much have we spent and how much are we going to spend? That's always the most important one. So we were able to project that, and they could see the spend happening there, and we could see the variation that would change, because it changed every 2 weeks.
Were you massaging your own data? Were you using Excel or Microsoft Project?
We were taking data exactly out of TFS.
Right.
So in every sprint and all the functionalities, we've developers have estimated what this is going to be. Right. So I didn't touch that figure at all.
So the steering committee saw words like sprints and backlogs and things?
Yeah, no, when I always reported at a sprint level, or at sprint
cool.
10. So they saw the raw numbers, which is good, because it was not matter of me saying I've massaged it and I'm trying to put a better face on this. The developers have told me it's going to be 14 weeks, but I'm going to try and get it in 10 because my budget says I have to. You know? So there was no gilding of the lily, which actually I like.
Okay. I've heard you say beware of a positive outlook. Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by that?
Sure. And that's not in the context that we don't want the team to be positive, which you do. You always want to have a friendly environment. Where I was thinking there, it's that naive positivity of an attitude that says, okay, I know I'm falling behind here, but in another 6 weeks I'm going to be able to develop at a far faster rate. Right. The users won't come up with any more requirements that I haven't known about there, and it's almost not facing the ugly truth of where you are. And so the old saying is, bad news is best delivered warm. It is true, is really true. And so if things are going to be bad, you need to have the trust and the confidence of the people you work with to tell you, hey Keith, where we're at, we're either not developing at the rate that we thought, there's other things coming in play. That's the reality of life. There's no point in denying it. It's let's accept this reality and let's deal with what we've got to do to...
So that happened on our project, wasn't it, where there was we kept getting, because with Scrum you obviously get the feedback every 2 weeks, and I think that it took a couple of weeks and we were getting this feedback, but we were doing the natural thing of human nature of, we can catch up and we can do this, and Keith believing us and stuff, and we actually then had to take a really strong look, and it was at that point where we said, right, we need to evaluate what we're doing. The numbers coming back, our feedback coming back is that we're going to end up being over. So we made some really hard decisions then, and we started to really streamline what we were doing and say, okay, do we really need this piece of functionality? Do we really need this piece of functionality? And for me, that was one of the bits where the project really started to go into full flow. Right. And again, if we could go back and do it again earlier, we maybe would have done that maybe a bit earlier, and that feeds back into this idea of the minimum viable product. Yep. This whole idea, do you really need it? Can you make those hard decisions? Because with Scrum, you just add it to the backlog and you just can do it later. So it's not like we're saying we're never going to build it, it's just, do we need to build this
I love
now?
that saying, I haven't heard it, bad news is best delivered warm. But Jared, if you could go back in time, what were some of the forgotten activities and things that you didn't put in the backlog and the estimates?
Yeah, so when we originally did the estimates, so this is quite a large project, and we're normally at our company we're doing slightly smaller scale ones, so we didn't factor in enough time for the meetings that would have to happen between the domain experts and the developers. So we spent a lot of time talking around the problem domain. So that was a lot of time that wasn't factored into our original estimates. So I suppose looking back now, if I was to do it again, I would factor that in for sure.
Okay. And I think this was a product of a very complicated project, and really giving the team the freedom to come up with the right solution. So it was never known, this is exactly what we want to do. We would discuss, debate, sort of take opposite views, but always with the intention of saying, what is it that we can do to make this a really quality product, and how can we develop efficiently? So often those things is it's not wasted time. Sometimes you think, I've got to get back to coding because I'm falling behind. But it's really about, no, let's plan what we really want to do and have a very, very clear idea of what we've got to build. And ultimately, that will be a far more efficient way of doing it, because you won't rework these things. The whole thing about lean and things like, and logistics and Kanban, it's a whole principle of reducing waste and planning and knowing what you're going to do is in fact reducing waste. I think there's a false misconception that you have to be in a waterfall project before you do any planning to do that. It's not true. Agile and Scrum simply makes you very focused on what you're going to have to plan for the next 2 weeks, but you still have your long-term plan exactly where all the bits fit in. Because if you don't have that, you will fail.
Yeah.
Agile doesn't recover from bad planning about where you want to be.
So I'm interested to know, what were the biggest challenges you have? Like, there's a few I can think of. Devs estimates. You had your stakeholders in Melbourne when you were in Sydney. You had your users all around the country. Which things gave you the most pain?
Probably in the real world. When we put things in the real world, So we did a couple of things. One thing is in minimum viable product, these guys in startups, they often have a concept of a pivot. That means they start with this one idea and then they suddenly decide that's not such a great idea. I'm actually going to pivot the project and I'm going to head in that direction. We had one of those ourselves, in the sense that we were going to use mobile apps to always get the updating from the drivers about where the trucks were and to confirm that. And we had that pivot moment that when we looked at all the phones that they had, the experience, and just that whole reliable, we went, no, we think we can do it better by using GPS and geofencing all the locations that we've got to go into, so that it automatically picks that data up there. So that was probably one of the hard things for us, because all of a sudden it was some fleet-footed thinking going, well, if we're pivoting the project here, what are all the other things we now have to incorporate to do that? So, and we thought of a whole lot of rules. When we got in the real world, we found it doesn't always work this way. Trucks aren't as planned in their trips as what we might have thought. When they're running late and you have geofencing and it's in the wrong time scale, you're suddenly updating the next trip rather than that. And so we were building a lot of rules and changes based on the real world, and that's what I say is always get this thing out in the real world, because that will do more testing and more validation than you can ever do in a lab or in a back-end process there.
So just to give a bit of context, so originally the mobile devices were going to do a lot of the work in the system, but eventually we realised that the drivers probably weren't going to do this work, so we were able to take the GPS and run algorithms over it to do the work that the drivers would do. We were able to say, the truck was going in this direction, it was heading towards this place, so it would have arrived at this position. So we were able to do that sort of work. So imagine if it had been a Waterfall project, they would have built all that mobile functionality and it would have never have got used.
All right.
Yeah, so they would have built, and it was quite a big chunk as well. They would have a large chunk of it, and it would have never have got used. But we were able to pivot at that point to say, the organisation isn't ready for this type of change at this level yet. Right. This is and we can do it using the algorithms. So let's go down this way.
So you didn't use their phones. You used a device.
We are going to
Yeah. So we still developed it, and it's still going to come in play. I think what changed its prominence to be able to sort of have the system working is no longer dependent on it now.
Right.
So by geofencing and getting that automatic, we're able to have the system deliver all the functionality and tracking and confirmation of things without the requirement that the driver has to stay there. And so the other, I suppose, the hard lessons was, it was just a complex project. When we started, we were having integration with Google Maps and pulling data down and be able to sort of, and to be honest, in the beginning, you didn't know how you were going to do that. Candidly, we just didn't know. We knew what we wanted to do. Did we know how we were going to do it? No. And so they are always the challenges. And I suppose from my perspective, that's where you entrust an organisation and you have confidence in your other team members, because you go, whatever this problem is, we're going to be able to solve it. And to the credit of Jared and Mark, the other member on our team, I had absolute confidence in your organisation that we could solve these problems, and that to me is really the challenge, and why my recommendation to people is, if you are going to develop in your own complicated projects, get absolutely the best team behind you that you can.
So
thank you for that little vote of confidence, but I wouldn't mind you explaining one of the things that might have contributed to your success, and it's kind of unusual, you employed 2 different companies for the first month and forked down some money. What was the thinking behind that? Because it's not very common.
No, it wasn't. So there's a couple of things. Now, one, we knew in advance what our environment that we wanted. So we wanted to build web-based technology. The enterprise that we worked with was Microsoft SQL, so the back end was known it was going to be there. And so it was a matter of sort of saying, well, what sits best in that environment for web technology? And we made a call earlier, okay, we're going to do an ASP.NET MVC. So, good, reliable technology, enough, sort of
market
take-up share and take-up and that around the world. So I really looked then for 2 companies that I said, well, I need to go and validate a couple of things. One, I need to validate the competency of the companies in this environment, because this is a custom development project. It's not off-the-shelf package. So I need to validate the custom development. I need to validate the competency of the team. Also the corporate fit. Sort of how well does the company you're going to choose fit with the style of our development. So again, we were looking for MVC. We made a call early in the piece. We are going to go Agile because as a philosophy, I was convinced that this was a better approach than going Waterfall. And the other one there is truly to validate costs. We had 2 projects we had that we were going to develop a smaller project on registration and permits and the larger one on the fleet monitoring. And so I used this as an opportunity to sit down with both these companies and sort of say, this is what we want to do. Give me your estimates as to what you think it'll be to develop. And so the costs that came back, obviously, is always important. You can't run away from that. The other one there is the confidence that I had in both organisations, and to be candid, I actually believe that both organisations would have produced it. In the end, the difference was not on the hourly rate. The larger project was closer together on costs. What was surprising to me is the smaller project had the largest difference in price. And you were far more cost competitive. And I looked at that and I couldn't. Ultimately, I put it down to a couple of things. Is that when you looked at my requirements, and this is something I really liked, you said, yeah, Keith, we could do it exactly looking like that UI, but if we use Twitter Bootstrap, and we did it slightly like this, we could significantly, we believe, reduce your costs in developing this, and showed me what it would look like. I said, I have no problems. It was a concept that I there, and so it made a significant difference. So one, I had an organisation, and I really like that thing where I dealt with a company that says, well, this is what you want, but to be honest, if you could do it this way, it's cheaper and better, I like cheaper and better. Right. so just finish off that. So what that then gave me the opportunity is to test you as a company, how well you did keep. So your estimates of what you said in that smaller project were pretty well spot on the money. There was a slight variation of a few percent. There was another bit where we actually added some requirements there. But overall, even with the added functionality and that, you were still considerably cheaper than what the other estimate was. And so after that, I had, one, I worked with you guys for that project. I liked the corporate culture. I had total confidence in the team. And so it was a very good way of me validating that your estimates of what you said were going to be pretty good on the money. And you had the technical competency, and actually we got on really well. So
okay. There was another thing that might have contributed to this success as well. Most companies, a product owner will turn up for every 2 weeks and be in contact, often sometimes daily scrums, but usually they turn up for the 2 weeks, do a sprint review, do a sprint planning, and do the retrospective. You decide to come here and plonk yourself right in our offices for the duration of the project. How important was that?
I think it was critical to the success of the project for a number of things. You know, one it made the communication with the team really streamlined, so it would be a matter of, you know, if there was an issue or misunderstanding, it was, you know, across the desk rather than across a phone call or an email there. The other one there is that it gives you total focus on that project. You know, you are living, breathing. You have so much in personal investment in time and energy in this project, and you own it. You want to do it. So, yeah, any organisation that bites off a large, complicated project, really, you know, to do the project truly justice, I think you need to have some of those resources dedicated to it that can do it. So, yeah.
And it helped the collaboration immensely, didn't it? Being able to just ask a question there and then, or be able to get you to find out the answer to that there and then. It was.
So Keith, one thing I forgot to ask you was the spec. How happy were you with the spec? Did you actually was just doing the mock-ups enough, or did you actually need to spend 6 months, you know, preparing? Could have you done less or more, or how happy were you with that?
So if people looked at the specification that you would normally associate with, you know, giving that over to a software house, they'd probably be aghast. They go, "Wow, there's not that much in there. There's a few screenshots and that there." But what it was is the work that was done beforehand was addressed at the business problem. What are the things that we need to do for this business, and how they work? So whilst we simplified things down to screenshot, the logic and the thinking was known about what this is trying to achieve. You know, because, for example, one of the real complexities of tracking a truck, you think, oh, well, that can't be too hard, but it is in the sense when trucks change halfway there, so you're not you're still the train.
What do you mean change?
For example, if you're going from Sydney to Perth, you may have a halfway point where the drivers and the truck actually meet at some point, and they unhitch the trucks and they put another truck on those trailers and or drivers. So the complexity of configuration is really hard. We knew this problem in advance, and ironically, it was one of the things I really liked when I did those 3 days with you guys, that Mark and Jared suddenly said, "Keith, you've got a great concept, but you've got to back the front." You know, we were sort of going to have the trucks and the trailers across the screen. They said, no, you've got to have it up and down because of these reasons. And the beauty about the system and why it's been so really well received, it has an incredibly elegant interface, simple, but it hides such complexity underneath. So.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to you. We had the goal, we had the business vision, but we weren't tied, as developers, we weren't tied to, here's the spec, build this. It was like, this is what we want to achieve, this is vaguely how we think we might do it, these are the problems that we need to be aware of, and then we were able to then...
Sure. Did you transform those into user stories as I want to so that I can?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And did you enforce acceptance criteria all the way?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Okay.
So when we looked at those things, so we had a very good vision about what we wanted to build there. So the initial part of the team was really getting Bob as the general manager of this business unit up for a week there, and we sat down and we just tried to sort of break this thing down as what are the things we have to build in each of these sprints. Then knowing how you wanted to break that down, and every one of those 2-week sprints, you really got down to the absolute detail about, well, what have we got to do in this thing? And these were the things we were talking about earlier. These discussions might be an hour or two. Some of the really complicated ones were taking near a day. We spent that much time discussing how this thing's going to build, and so we would build. We knew the logic, the structures, and then after having built that, we put the nice pretty face on it there, because as you know, you have a very competent sort of graphics designer, and so for the core functionality that was really important, we then put the sort of the nice gloss and the UI on it there. But so it worked very well, because if we tried to just spec this thing out, we would have spent, half the project never building anything. We would have just talked about how this thing might work. I'm sure I would have forgotten most of what I said, months ago. And the reality is, you can only design it up to a certain level. The real world is the final place that you test it with there, and that's and we made change after we went live with this this product, with the view of saying this is making it better.
Right.
Exactly.
So is there anything that you would have done differently?
As I said, Jared pointed to that earlier. I think we would have been more disciplined about getting a minimum viable product out even earlier.
Okay.
If we look back and we said, what of this thing could we have jettisoned? We couldn't jettison that product or the functionality overall, because you have to build it. But what we would have done is looked at the core of the system and got that out, and then probably got a wider group of people to give us feedback.
And it's one of those things that no matter how small you think you've got it to, I think if anyone's going to do a project now, no matter how small you think you've got it to, you can get it smaller. Get it as thin as possible and get it out there, because that it's only in that end-to-end test that everything's going to come out, and that's going to give you more information and allow you to end that honeymoon period and get to that real information as soon as possible.
Keith, on this project, the Scrum Master would come in for the daily scrums and for the sprint review, so once every 2 weeks essentially. How did Yuli go doing that compared with having, because obviously Jared is a Scrum Master quite often, but he was on the team. Did you like having an external Scrum Master, or it would have been just as good on the team?
No, I think there's some distinct advantages of having an external Scrum Master. Having it in the team, particularly when you get busy, there's always the sort of, the possibility to go, oh look, I'm so busy, we just won't do this. With an external Scrum Master, you have the discipline of, you've got the daily stand-ups, which don't have to be long, they can be 5-10 minutes. But the review at the end of each sprint was done religiously, and it was a matter of sort of saying, okay, what's all the stuff we've done? Let's show it to me, demonstrate it. Keith, are you fine with that? And then and it forced that discipline of not only looking what you did do, but okay, guys, what are you planning for the next 2 weeks? And the other one is that nice review of okay, what could have been done better? What were the good things about it? And that's reinforcing it, to have someone externally sort of say, yeah, that went really well, that was great, and what didn't go so well. And so you look at those things and say, can I do something to make that not so well better? And again, he was because as I said earlier, the costs were driven out of TFS on that, so I was actually getting that from the Scrum Master, so they're untainted there. So it worked well.
Yeah, completely agree. Because there'd have been times if we hadn't have had an external Scrum Master, where we'd have all been like, review? Do we need a review? Because you were all over the project. Like, it was almost like sometimes at the review, it felt like we were almost regurgitating things that we already knew. But what it's there for is just to allow you to take that time to just step back a bit. Stop doing your work for a bit and reevaluate the project. And so that was really valuable. And I think without the external Scrum Master, I think there would have been occasions where we would have skipped it, and I think we would have lost. We would have lost.
So Keith, did you come in on budget?
We did. So let me put it in this context. 6-8 weeks out, we knew our functionality, and we applied for another 5% on this budget for approval to develop these things in the time frame. So in that sense, we are, and this is in the context, this is north of a $500,000 project with development. So our base costs there, so Could we have come in exactly on that without that number? Yes, we could have, because we would have just jettisoned some more stuff out there. We went to the business saying, look, we can come in on this thing, but there's some functionality that we would like to bring in here and still keep the team going. 'Cause literally, we kept the team going only for another couple of weeks, so we were one extra sprint over what we projected. So we controlled that in the end by saying, this is the budget. No, it's not a bottomless pit of money. There's the budget. And we stripped stuff off that we didn't need or that was not absolutely essential. But I think the nice approach that we've taken there is on an ongoing maintenance, rather than just having maintenance or let's sit around on the basis that something might happen one day and we've taken to actively engage, one day a week, so that we're doing development in that time. These bits and pieces that we thought were important or were nice to have, we're now picking up in this maintenance phase of things. So in the end, if you were to ask the steering committee, they are very pleased in the sense that the number when we got that approval, we were $507 positive. So we got that close. In accuracy.
Wow.
And in the end, we delivered on time where we said we were going to go.
Okay.
So I think we solved the business problem, but if you were to analyse the original spec to what was actually built, you couldn't compare the two because they're so far different. Right. So in regards to if you were saying, did the estimate match the original estimate, then no, but did they achieve the business, did they solve the business problem with the budget that they had? Yes, and then some as well.
So is it worth asking, can estimating be improved? Could estimating be more perfected?
So yes, I think early in the piece, and this is the good thing about reviewing these costs, I could see that the straight hours of development were about 20% off the mark. Early in the piece. So we knew that this is our estimate, those numbers. There were some other parts in the project that I had allocated some fat to it that effectively incorporate there. I think you still want to maintain...
Was that your secret fudge?
It was a realistic recalibration by me as to how good the estimates were. But the estimates, as I said, they were accurate, but they weren't for all of it. That was the thing. They were estimates as to, this is going to take me 3 hours to do, and there's 2 hours there. But it wasn't. But there's also this, 20% of time where we're going to have to talk about these things, and it's the bit that we don't know. And that was the thing that's hard to estimate. You go, well, how much do I estimate what I don't know?
Exactly.
And that's where the extra bit comes in there.
Right, and so should enterprises do fixed price or time materials?
I have very strong views that I think fixed price does a couple of things. One, it ultimately stops innovative change in a project because you almost develop a combative attitude between supplier and customer going, well, okay, here's our spec, and the moment you've changed the spec, I want to have a change control, and then we're going to argue about how much is the change on the change control. So I think it doesn't...
And even if you win that argument, you've potentially lost some teamwork.
Oh, exactly. You end up spending so much energy and time arguing about that, whereas if you accept these things have to change and this is what it's going to cost, spend the time doing it. I could waste... I've seen projects where project managers spend so much of their time in combative arguments about, well, the costs, or that's a bug versus enhancement versus doing things. So, and from a software supplier's point of view, if you fix costs, all you're going to do is put an element of risk in there. So you're going to say, well, I'm the unknown there, I'm going to bump this up 25%, 40% because I don't know what this is, and I've got to protect my organisation. So I don't think in the end you get a better result. It doesn't make the programmers work any faster. It doesn't eliminate waste. What it does is it constrains you to just, this is a spec and I can't go outside that spec unless I go through this convoluted process. And it's far better to have it be agile, actually welcome change, and pull the levers by what functionality I'm not going to put in there.
Right. And did you raise any eyebrows when you saw the guys down tools at 11 o'clock every day and start doing push-ups?
That was, no. I actually like the corporate culture. This is a very relaxed organisation here, so you can often see us coming in shorts, so we're not in uniforms. and again, it's flexible in the sense of, team hours. We actually started in at 3 different times. We had Jared's an early morning person. I used to be early till I met you guys, and Mark's a late an afternoon person, but works very long into the hours. Yeah. So we worked out we had to have common hours together.
Right.
So this was part of the whole thing about how it was teamwork. As opposed to, we weren't in this combative attitude.
Right.
I can imagine in a combative attitude it might be like, why is he starting at this time?
Right.
Why is he doing that? Whereas when we'd get to the end of the sprint and we'd review what went well, and we'd say, and Mark would be like, you know what, I get most of my work done after 7 when nobody's here. So I prefer to come in later and finish later. And so what we did was we rearranged all the meetings so that the overlap when we were here, the meetings would happen in that period when everybody was here. And we were able to do that by constantly evaluating the team and what we were doing, but also the fact that we had the trust in each other and the good relationship.
So it was a lot about trust.
Oh, absolutely. It's not about hours spent on project. At the end of the day, it's about output. And if you look at very competent people, the output that they can get in a limited time is quite amazing. And so I've never been sort of fussed about starting times. I was with regards to the exercise, appreciative that the one thing they didn't make me insist that I had to do it. They're far too fit for me, your team. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's a nice culture. If you come to work, can have fun, can laugh. If you looked at our team at various snapshots in the day, you'd wonder whether we were working because there was always so much laughter happening. But it was in a context of actually doing work.
And then 30 minutes later it would be deadly silent and people would be churning out the work. So it's that idea that, riding with the ebbs and flows of the team, and that you're going to be perform well at certain times. Like for me, when I got in early in the morning and there was no one here, I would get through so much stuff, and then everyone would come in and we'd do lots of talking and lots of sharing of information, and then that would allow you in those times when it was quiet to then express that knowledge that you gained.
Well, that's a nice way to finish, and I'd like to thank you, Jared. Thank you, Keith. I think we've had a good session on Agile in the enterprise, and hopefully you've learned some lessons.